People think they know how the New World was discovered. They think they know who gets the credit. But buried inside the family tree of a modern public figure is a man whose story doesn't fit the official version. An explorer whose name faded, whose journey was quietly erased, and whose fate raises an uncomfortable question. What happens when discovery belongs to the wrong empire? This isn't a legend. This isn't a rumor. It's a documented life that intersects with secrecy, rivalry, and power at the very beginning of the Atlantic world. Today, I'm tracing the line in Geraldo Rivera's family tree that leads back to a man history left behind, an explorer tied to forbidden voyages, dangerous coastlines, and a discovery that may have come at a deadly cost. And the most important part of the story isn't just where he went. It's why his name didn't survive and who did. I am Dyron Castro Torres, the genealogist, and this is the Lost Explorer in Geraldo Rivera's family tree. Geraldo Rivera was born Gerald Michael Riviera, a name that already hinted at the dual worlds he would spend his life navigating: identity and exposure, secrecy and revelation. He was born in New York City to Cruz Allen Rivera, a Puerto Rican father, and Lillian Friedman, an Ashkenazi Jewish mother. Two histories, two diasporas, two different inheritances. And for the purposes of this story, it is his father's Puerto Rican line that matters. Rivera came of age during a moment when television journalism was no longer content with polite distance. He did not simply report events. He forced them open. His career would become synonymous with confrontation, spectacle, and a belief that the public had the right to see what power preferred to keep hidden. That belief reached a historic apex in 1975 when Rivera played a central role in introducing American people to the Zapruder film, the only known motion picture capturing the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. For years, the footage had been locked away, restricted, controlled, and when it finally aired, it shattered official narratives and permanently altered public trust in institutions. From that moment forward, Rivera's legacy was set. He became a journalist who crossed lines others would not, sometimes to acclaim, sometimes to controversy, but never without consequence. Whether exposing abuse, challenging government secrecy, or placing himself in the center of unfolding events, Rivera's career was defined by one recurring theme: what is hidden must be revealed. That instinct to dig, to confront, to refuse silence did not appear out of nowhere. It did not begin on television, and it did not start with him. Because long before Geraldo Rivera stood in front of a camera demanding answers, his father carried a name, a lineage, and a history shaped by migration, empire, and survival in the Atlantic world. To understand where those instincts come from, we have to step away from the spotlight and follow the Rivera name back one generation. We begin with his father, Cruz Allen Rivera. This document marks a quiet but critical moment in the Rivera family line. Dated November 9, 1915, this is the birth record of Cruz Rivera Rivera, registered in Barceloneta, Puerto Rico. The record tells us that Cruz was born to Juan Rivera and Tomasa Rivera, firmly placing him within the established Rivera household at the start of the 20th century. But the true genealogical weight of this record lies in what it preserves across generations. On his father's side, Cruz Rivera Rivera is the grandson of Zoilo Rivera and Rafaela Ayala. On his mother's side, he was the grandson of Casimiro Rivera and Yuliteria de Avila. 4 grandparents, 4 surnames, each one representing an earlier chapter of migration, marriage, and survival in Puerto Rico. This single act of birth ties together 2 Rivera lines, paternal and maternal, already rooted on the island long before the Rivera name would appear on American television screens. And now that we know exactly where Cruz Rivera Rivera fits on the record, the next step is to move backwards, to the people who he came from, To understand the family's deeper story, we begin with his parents, Juan Rivera and Tomasa Rivera. This document brings the Rivera line into clear focus. Dated December 25, 1910, this is the marriage record of Juan Rivera and Tomasa Rivera. Formally joined in Puerto Rico at the start of the new century, it is a quiet record, but one with heavy genealogical meaning. The document identifies Juan Rivera as the son of Zoilo Rivera and Ruperta Ayala, anchoring this paternal line firmly in the Rivera-Ayala family network. Tomasa Rivera is recorded as the daughter of Casimiro Rivera and Uliteria Fonseca, bringing the second Rivera line together through marriage. This union explains what we see later in their son's birth record, two Rivera surnames converging, reinforced by long-standing family ties rather than coincidence. But to understand how this family line was shaped and which stories have been preserved or lost, we now have to move one generation further back. This next chapter begins with Eleuteria Fonseca. This record actually closes a chapter and clarifies a name. Dated October 31st, 1936, this is the death record of Eleuteria de Avila Fonseca. She is identified as the widow of Casimiro Rivera, confirming, by the time of her death, her husband had already passed away and that she was living on her own legal identity. What makes this document especially important is how she is named. In earlier records, she appears simply as Eleuteria Fonseca. Here, she is recorded as Eleuteria de Avila Fonseca, using both paternal and maternal surnames. That shift is not an error. It reflects the fuller preservation of her parentage later in life. The record identifies her as the daughter of Hipólito de Avila and Carmen Fonseca, anchoring her firmly in the de Avila Fonseca line and explaining the surname usage we now see in this final document. This single record resolves a question created by earlier paperwork and confirms that Eleuteria Fonseca and Eleuteria de Avila Fonseca are the same woman. One life, recorded in different moments under different naming conventions. And now that her identity is fully established, the story moves back another generation. The next step begins with her father, Hipólito de Avila. This record pushes the line back another generation and resolves another naming shift. Dated June 6, 1922, this is the marriage record of Hipólito de Avila, recorded here at 60 years old, and Maria Fonseca, recorded at 50 years old. This marriage took place in Bayamón, formalizing a union later in life that nonetheless preserves critical genealogical detail. The document identifies Hipólito de Avila as the son of Juan de Avila and Laura Nader, firmly establishing his paternal and maternal lines. His bride, Maria Fonseca, previously referred to as Carmen in earlier records, is identified here as the daughter of Vicente Fonseca and Brigda Marrero, confirming that both names refer to the same woman across different documents. Once again, the record reminds us that names could shift with time, circumstance, and record keeper, but lineage remains consistent when the paper trail is followed carefully. And now that Hipólito de Avila is securely placed within his family, the line moves back one more step. The next chapter begins with his father, Juan de Avila. This record takes us firmly into the 19th century and into a family that clearly understood status, legitimacy, and name. Dated July 8, 1864, this is the marriage record of Juan de Avila, identified explicitly as the legitimate son of Don Juan Ramón de Avila and Doña María Dolores Franco, and he's marrying Francesca Laura Nader, the legitimate daughter of Don José Nader and Doña Catalina de Avila. The language on this document matters. The use of Don and Doña was not decorative. In the 19th century Puerto Rico, these honorifics signaled social standing, respectability, and recognized legitimacy within the community. Their presence here tells us that both families were regarded as established, reputable households, people whose names, marriages, and descendants were meant to be formally recorded and remembered. Just as important is the repeated emphasis on legitimacy. This was a marriage between two individuals whose parentage was publicly acknowledged and legally recognized, reinforcing continuity in the Davila and Nader lines. This single record ties together multiple generations and now points us clearly to the man who anchors this branch of the family. The next step of this story begins with Don Juan Ramon Davila. This record anchors the Davila line in the early 19th century San Juan and confirms a family firmly established in status and legitimacy. Dated March 28, 1835, this is the marriage record from San Juan, Puerto Rico of Juan Ramon Davila, identified as the legitimate son of Don Tomás Davila Quiñones and Doña Antonia Davila, and he's marrying Maria Dolores Salvadora Franco, the legitimate daughter of Don Manuel Franco and Doña Maria Ramona Canales. Once again, the language of this record is deliberate. The repeated use of Don and Doña, combined with explicit statements of legitimacy, places both families within a recognized social and legal standing in colonial Puerto Rico. These were households whose marriages were carefully documented, whose names carried weight, and whose descendants were meant to be traceable. This family ties together Davila, Quiñones, Franco, and Canales families, lines that had already been present and active in Puerto Rico well before the mid-19th century. And with Juan Ramon Davila now firmly placed, the paper trail points clearly to the man who stands at the head of the branch of this family. The story now moves to his father, Don Tomás Davila Quiñones. This record takes us deep into the core of the Davila family. It reveals just how closely connected this lineage had become by the turn of the 19th century. Dated July 19, 1802, this is the marriage record of Tomás Davila, identified as the legitimate son of Regidor Don Miguel Davila and Doña Antonia Quiñones, and he's marrying Antonia de Avila, the legitimate daughter of Capitan Don Manuel de Avila and Doña Maria de Avila. The titles in this record are immediately telling. One father served as regidor, a municipal official within the local government, while the other held the rank of captain, indicating military standing. This marriage united two branches of the same elite family network, civil authority and military service converging within the Davila name. Most striking, however, is the explicit acknowledgement of multiple degrees of consanguinity. The couple received a dispensation for three separate lines of relatedness: a second degree with a third with a fourth, and a fourth degree of consanguinity. Such complexity leaves little doubt that these connections ran through the Davila family itself, reflecting generations of intermarriages within a small, established social circle. Rather than obscuring these relationships, the church documented them carefully, because lineage, legitimacy, and status mattered deeply in this community. And with this marriage firmly placed, the record now points us to the man at the head of this branch of the family. The story continues with Regidor Don Miguel Davila. This next record carries us firmly into the mid-18th century, into a family already marked by status, continuity, and long memory. Dated February 22nd, 1748, this is the marriage record from Bayamon, Puerto Rico, of Miguel Davila, identified as the legitimate son of Don Tomás Davila and Doña Luisa Polanco, and he's marrying Antonia Quiñones, the legitimate daughter of Don Jose Quiñones and Doña Feliciana de Lugo. Once again, the consistent use of Don and Doña is deliberate. These honorifics signal families of recognized standing, household, whose marriages were publicly sanctioned, carefully recorded, and socially meaningful. By this point, the Davila, Quiñones, Polanco, and Lugo families were part of the established colonial network of Puerto Rico. This marriage unites multiple elite lineages and helps explain the dense web of kinship we see in later generations. It also places Miguel de Avila squarely within a lineage that had already been present on the island for decades before this record was even written. And with Miguel de Avila now securely placed, the line moves back yet another generation. The story continues with his father, Don Tomás de Avila. This record brings us squarely into the early 18th century and into a tightly interwoven family network. Dated December 27, 1724, this is the marriage record of Don Tomás de Avila, identified as the legitimate son of Captain Josef de Avila and Doña Josefa de los Olivos, and he's marrying Doña Luisa Polanco, the legitimate daughter of Captain Juan Polanco and Doña Elena de Avila. The consistent use of Captain, Don, and Doña places both families among Puerto Rico's established colonial elite, families tied to military service, landholding, and long-standing local authority. The record also preserves an important point of origin. Captain Juan Polanco is noted as having arrived in Puerto Rico from Jerez de la Frontera, Spain, anchoring this branch of the family directly to the Iberian Peninsula. Most revealing, however, is the explicit dispensation of consanguinity. This marriage required a second degree with a third degree of consanguinity, meaning the groom's mother, Josefa de los Olivos, was the aunt of the bride's mother, Elena de Avila. In other words, this union joined two closely related branches of the Davila family, a pattern repeated across generations and carefully documented by the church rather than concealed. These dispensations do not signal scandal. They signal status, continuity, community, where a lineage is well known and formally regulated. And with this marriage established, we can now turn to the woman at the center of that kinship connection. The story continues with Doña Josefa de los Olivos. This record takes us decisively into the 17th century and into the moment when this family line first anchors itself in Puerto Rico. Dated January 24th, 1693, this is the marriage record of Josef de Avila, identified as Alferez Don Josef de Avila, born in Jerez de la Frontera, Spain, and the legitimate son of Josef de Avila and Ana de la Cueva. His bride is Josefa Espinosa Lancebo y Olivos, the legitimate daughter of Alonso de Espinosa y Olivos Lancebo, and Augustina Lugo de Sotomayor. The titles in this record are precise and revealing. Josef de Avila held the rank of alferez, a commissioned military officer, and his marriage united two families already deeply embedded in colonial governance, military service, and landholding. This was not a casual union. It was a carefully documented alliance between established lineages. One witness stands out with particular importance: Captain Juan Lugo de Sotomayor, identified as a captain and recorded here not merely as a witness, but as family. He was the uncle of the bride, brother of Agustina Lugo de Sotomayor, and Agustina and Juan are children of Capitan Juan Lugo de Sotomayor and Luisa Velázquez. This single marriage record ties together Spain and Puerto Rico, military rank and family alliance, and introduces the Lugo de Sotomayor line as the central pillar of the ancestry that follows. And with that connection now clearly established, the story moves to the next generation that laid the foundation for it all. We now turn to Geraldo Rivera and my shared ancestors, Capitan Juan Lugo de Sotomayor and Doña Luisa Velázquez. Captain Juan Lugo de Sotomayor stands as one of the quiet pillars of Puerto Rico's early military history, present at moments when the island's survival was not guaranteed, and descended from men whose lives were forged in conquest, frontier war, and sacrifice. Juan Lugo de Sotomayor was a captain in the Spanish colonial militia and a veteran of the 1625 Dutch attack on San Juan, one of the most consequential military events in Puerto Rican history. During the invasion, led by Baldwin Hendricks, Spanish defenses were stretched to a breaking point. Juan Lugo de Sotomayor was entrusted at the defense of San Antonio Bridge, a strategic choke point controlling access between the inlet of San Juan and to the main island. Holding that bridge meant holding the city. His role places among the core officers responsible for preventing the complete collapse of Spanish control during the assault. Juan Lugo de Sotomayor did not emerge from obscurity. He was the son of Captain Pedro Mejia de Lugo, himself a seasoned soldier and veteran of the 1595 English attack on San Juan, when Sir Francis Drake attempted and failed to take the city. Pedro Mejia de Lugo was born in Tenerife, Canary Islands, and he brought to Puerto Rico not only military experience, but a lineage already marked by conquest and royal service. Pedro Mejia de Lugo was the son of Juan Benitez de Lugo and Elvira Mejia de Figueroa, both descended from original conquerors of the Canary Islands. Juan Benitez de Lugo was the son of the legendary Pedro el Tuerto Benitez de Lugo, one of the most celebrated figures of the conquest of the Canary Islands. Pedro el Tuerto fought alongside his uncle, Alonso Fernandez de Lugo, the Adelantado, responsible for the conquest of Tenerife and La Palma. When Alonso Fernandez de Lugo later received royal orders to lead an offensive attack against Muslim forces in North Africa, Pedro el Tuerto joined that expedition. During what later chroniclers called the Battle of the Towers, Spanish forces constructed a fortified tower at San Miguel de Asaca on the African coast. When they were overwhelmed by vastly superior numbers, Pedro el Tuerto Benitez de Lugo, along with 18 other men, made a final stand at the tower. Their resilience allowed the remaining Spaniards to retreat. Pedro el Tuerto died there, outnumbered, fighting to the end, and was thereafter widely remembered in the Canary Islands as a model for martial honor and sacrifice. His death is repeatedly cited in Canary Islands conquest literature as emblematic of the extreme cost of Spain's Atlantic expansion. Elvira Mejia de Figueroa was the maternal granddaughter of Pedro Mejia, another documented conqueror of the Canary Islands, reinforcing that this lineage did not brush against history, it helped make it. On the maternal side, Juan Lugo de Sotomayor descended from Isabel de Sotomayor, daughter of Hernan Perez and Maria del Rincon, further embedding him within the interlocking network of Puerto Rican elite colonial families. By the time Juan de Lugo de Sotomayor stood at the Puente de los Soldados in 1625, he carried with him over a century of inherited military service, from the conquest of Tenerife to North Africa to the defense of Puerto Rico against England and the Netherlands. His career represents continuity, the transformation of conquistador violence into colonial defense, and the frontier warfare into institutional military command. And yet, the story does not end with him, because the next generation will carry this bloodline even further into exploration, disappearance, and legend. We now return to Doña Luisa Velázquez, the wife of Captain Juan Lugo de Sotomayor, a woman descended from the lost explorer. This record opens a window into lineage, status, and how families chose to be remembered. What we are looking at here is the Méritos record documenting the service of the brother of Doña Luisa Velázquez, identifying them as the children of Baltasar Velázquez and Maria Bautista. These were not ordinary names placed on a paper for routine record keeping. Méritos existed to establish honor, service, and ancestry, especially when lineage itself was considered a form of qualification. The record explains that Baltasar Velázquez was the son of Diego Franquis and Juana Velázquez. Diego Franquis was born in Sevilla, Spain, and was among the largest sugar barons of the New World, part of the economic elite that shaped early Puerto Rico through plantation agriculture, labor systems, and transatlantic capital. His name places his family squarely within the economic foundations of the island. On the maternal side, Maria Bautista is identified as the daughter of Luis Pérez de Rincón and Juana Bautista. The document explicitly states that both parents descended from the primary conquistadors and early populators of Puerto Rico, a claim made carefully and deliberately in a legal context where ancestry mattered. One detail is especially telling. Both Baltasar Velázquez and Maria Bautista carried their maternal surnames. This was not accidental. In family status, maternal lines could carry just as much or more social and historical weight as paternal ones. The surnames chosen here signal prestige, legacy, and recognized descent rather than a simple patronymic convention. This Méritos record does more than list names. It asserts that this family's service, position, and authority were inherited, not claimed. And with this foundation established, the line now turns to the woman anchoring the maternal side of this legacy. The story continues with Maria Bautista's parents, Juan Díaz de Santana and Maria de Valencia. Juan Díaz de Santana was a figure firmly embedded in the earliest civic, military, and economic life in colonial Puerto Rico. The son of Hernando de Lepe and Isabel Garcia, Juan carried a surname that itself preserves a family history. The Díaz in Díaz de Santana comes not from his father, but from his paternal grandmother, Juana Díaz, the wife of Hernando de Lepe and mother of Alonso de Lepe. This deliberate use of the maternal surname reflects both prestige and continuity, anchoring Juan to an older Atlantic lineage rather than a single paternal line. Juan Díaz de Santana appears repeatedly in the 16th century records as a regidor and vecino of San Juan, a man trusted with arms, testimony, and public office. He served in coastal defense, took part in musters of mounted men, testified in major government inquiries, and was directly involved in the island's response to foreign attacks, including the English assault in 1595, where one of his ships were sunk by the forces of Sir Francis Drake in his failed attempt to take Puerto Rico. Beyond military service, he was also deeply tied into the island's economy, registering merchandise to Seville, engaging in sugar production, and holding civic posts such as Alcalde Ordinario and Procurador. His marriage to Maria de Valencia further connected him to the network of early settler families who shaped Puerto Rico's political and economic foundations. Juan Díaz de Santana stands as a bridge generation, born into the early age of exploration, active during the era of fortification and consolidation, and remembered through records that emphasize service, legitimacy, and lineage. To understand where this lineage truly begins, however, we have to move to one generation further back, to the man who carried the Lepe name across the Atlantic. The story now turns to Hernando de Lepe. Hernando de Lepe arrived in Puerto Rico at the very beginning of its colonial history, coming from Villa de Almonte, Andalusia, Spain, alongside his brother Alonso de Lepe. They were the sons of Diego de Lepe and Leonor González de Villarreal, carrying with them a lineage already shaped by Atlantic exploration, royal service, and risk. Hernando de Lepe was not just a peripheral settler. He was a conquistador of Puerto Rico, a mounted officer, and later Capitan of the militia of San Juan. He served as regidor, alcalde ordinario, and teniente a guerra, placing him at the center of both islands' defense and its political life. He fought in the earliest decades when San Juan was still very vulnerable, when the town was burned by native Caribs, when French corsairs threatened the coast, and when survival depended on men who could fight, organize, and endure. Again and again, Hernando de Lepe appears in the records not as a bystander, but as a man entrusted with arms, authority, and responsibility. What sets Hernando de Lepe apart, even among conquistadors, is what came next. He was one of the very few conquistadors of Puerto Rico to receive a personal, custom coat of arms granted not by a local official, but directly from the emperor himself, Carlos V, King of Spain and ruler of the Indies. The language of the patent of nobility leaves no ambiguity about why. Don Carlos and Doña Juana, whereas, on your behalf, Hernando de Lepe, resident of the island of San Juan, which is in our Indies of the Ocean Sea, it has been reported to us that approximately 30 years ago, more or less, you, desiring to serve us, went to the said island and participated in its conquest with your arms and horse, especially in the defense of the old town that the Caribs burned on the said island, and that you have been a captain of men there on several occasions when it was necessary to assemble, both for the defense against French corsairs who went there to burn and plunder, and against Indians, and that in all of this, you have endured many hardships, hunger, and privations. And so, that a perpetual memory of you and your services might remain, we commanded that you be granted a coat of arms, which shall bear a strong house in the manner of a golden tower, on a blue field, and, as a border of the said shield, 4 pairs of lances placed in saltire, and, for a crest, a closed helmet, and for a device, a tiger, from the waist up in a leaping posture, with its mantling and dependencies and foliage of blue and gold. This was not symbolic generosity. It was imperial recognition of sustained military service, personal sacrifice, and loyalty under extreme conditions. In an era when most conquistadors received land or office, Hernando de Lepe received heraldry, a permanent visual memory of service meant to endure beyond his lifetime. Hernando de Lepe represents the transformation of conquest into settlement and the violence into institutional defense. But his story did not begin with him, because the courage, risk, and defiance that defined his life were inherited. To understand where this legacy truly starts, we now go to the next generation, to Diego de Lepe, the explorer history almost forgot. Diego de Lepe was born in the town where he got his surname, Lepe, in Andalusia, and later settled in Palos de la Frontera, a place electrified by discovery. In the years after Christopher Columbus shattered the boundaries of the known world, Palos became a forge of ambition, rumor, and restless men who believed that the ocean still had secrets meant for them. Diego de Lepe was one of those men. Without noble backing, without naval experience, but armed with conviction and risk, he stepped into history at precisely the moment when Spain loosened its grip on discovery and allowed private men to chase the horizon. In 1499, as Columbus fell from royal favor and the crown opened up the seas through new capitulations of discovery, Lepe seized the chance. He secured royal permission granted by Bishop Juan Rodriguez de Fonseca, the powerful minister of the Indies, to sail toward Paria, famed for its pearls and wealth. Though inexperienced at sea, Lepe assembled an expedition that blended daring with expertise, seasoned pilots who had sailed with Columbus himself, including Bartolome Roldan, guided his flagship. He sold assets, borrowed at ruinous interest, and staked his entire fortune into 2 caravels that slipped out of the Tinto Odiel estuary and into the Atlantic, following the same route Columbus had taken on his 3rd voyage, but with more dangerous ambition, to cross the equator and reach Asia from the west. Instead, in January of 1500, Diego de Lepe reached something far more extraordinary. He made landfall on the easternmost edge of Brazil, months before the Portuguese expedition of Pedro Alvarez Cabral would officially discover it. On a lonely cape, likely Cabo de San Agustin, near modern Recife, Lepe erected a cross and named the land Santa Cruz, claiming it for Spain. This was no accident, no brush with the coast. Lepe had crossed into the southern hemisphere, past the equatorial calms, and stood on a continent the world had not yet fully grasped. His arrival was so early that even historians would later struggle to place it, caught between treaties, rival empires, and deliberate silence. From there, Lepe pressed on. He followed the vast curve of South America's coast, witnessing the mouths of great rivers, including the Orinoco, whose violent tidal waves, the Macareo, he carefully recorded. He named the river Marañón, a designation that would later migrate, confusingly, to the Amazon itself. Along these shores, Lepe claimed territory for Spain, explored bays and river mouths, and survived violent encounters with indigenous peoples, losing 11 men in one attack. He reached Paria, traded for pearls, explored Trinidad, passed through the Serpent's Mouth, and encountered the rival expedition of Vicente Yáñez Pinzón, who now followed in Lepe's wake. By August of 1500, Diego de Lepe returned to Spain. He carried charts, observations, and proof that a vast continental landmass existed far south of anything Columbus had claimed. His discoveries were significant enough to be recorded by Juan de la Cosa's famous world map of 1500, and yet Lepe's triumph was hollow. Portugal claimed Brazil under the Treaty of Tordesillas, despite the fact that Spaniards had reached it first. His cargo, pearls, spices, dyewood, barely covered his crushing debts. Worse, he was reprimanded for capturing indigenous people, and the crown offered little protection from his creditors. By the end of the year, Diego de Lepe was financially ruined. Still, he refused to vanish. In 1501, he secured authorization for a second expedition, this time with 4 ships, stricter oversight, and explicit prohibition against enslaving natives. But delays mounted. Officials accused him of overreaching. Extensions were granted, preparations dragged into 1502. After that, the historical record fractures. Some sources suggest that Diego de Lepe sailed again, perhaps once more towards Brazil, perhaps beyond. Others place him in Lisbon in 1512, where, according to troubling accounts, he died by hanging, and where history gives way to shadow. It is entirely plausible and fiercely debated that Diego de Lepe was executed by the Portuguese. He had reached Brazil before them. He had claimed it for Spain. He had maps, testimony, and royal authorization. At a moment when Portugal was desperate to secure its dominance over the South Atlantic, a Spanish explorer with proof of prior discovery was a dangerous man. Silencing him would have erased a rival claim before it was ever fully asserted. Whether killed by politics, poverty, or power, Diego de Lepe vanished, but his legacy did not. He proved the lands south of the equator were not islands. He reached Brazil before its official discovery. He expanded the geographic imagination of Europe, and through his descendants, men like Hernando de Lepe, conquistador of Puerto Rico, and bearer of an imperial coat of arms. His bloodline carried forward a story the world nearly forgot. This story began in the modern age with Geraldo Rivera, a man whose career was built on exposing what powerful institutions tried to keep hidden. From revealing the Zapruder film to challenging official narratives on national television, Rivera became synonymous with confrontation, disclosure, and refusal to accept silence. But as we traced his Puerto Rican lineage backwards, through birth records, marriage dispensations, military titles, and méritos, we discovered that this instinct did not begin with him. It was inherited. Generation by generation, the Rivera to the Davila line carried us through colonial Puerto Rico's elite networks, regidors, captains, defenders of San Juan, families bound by consanguinity, honor, and service. That line led us to Hernando de Lepe, conquistador of Puerto Rico, veteran of the Carib attacks and Corsair raids, and one of the rare men personally granted a coat of arms by Emperor Carlos V, an explicit acknowledgement of sacrifice, endurance, and loyalty at the edge of empire. And beyond Hernando, the trail led further back still, to the source of the Lepe name itself. At the root stands Diego de Lepe, a lost explorer, a man who reached Brazil before it was officially discovered, who crossed the equator, mapped rivers, claimed land for Spain, and returned with proof that reshaped Europe's understanding of the world. His reward was not glory, but debt, silence, and disappearance. Whether ruined by economics or deliberately erased by imperial rivalry, Diego de Lepe paid the price for discovering something the wrong empire could not afford to acknowledge. Yet, his legacy survived where empires failed, in bloodlines, records, and descendants who carried his story forward, even when his name was pushed aside. This is what genealogy does. It restores continuity where history fractures. It reveals that the modern world was not disconnected from the age of conquest, but built directly above it, line by line, name by name. From a television journalist who challenged secrecy, back to an explorer who may have been silenced for what he found. This family tree tells a single story. Discovery has consequences, and truth has a long memory. I am Dyron Castro Torres, the genealogist, and this is just the beginning.